Up next, we are going to talk a little bit about wearables, a little bit about design. You really can't go anywhere without hearing the term wearable now, which is why I'm really excited that Leena Rao is going to be interviewing Hosain Rahman from Jawbone. Give it up.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be in New York.
So I have one of the new versions of the app here, and I'm really curious, what's the most interesting thing that I'm going to learn about myself from this?
It depends on what you do, I guess. It depends on sort of all the different aspects of your life. But I mean, certainly you'll understand a lot more about yourself, how you sleep, what your patterns are, all kinds of things. The thing that's interesting about sleep is it's different every night. So it's sort of a journey, and I think what's been interesting for me personally is how that relates to all the other things that I do in my life.
What have you learned about yourself?
I don't sleep enough.
That
certainly
seems to be
don't.
a common trait for entrepreneurs.
Yeah. It's something that we need to work on. I was talking to Ariana Huffington about that this weekend because she's a big proponent of sleep, and it is important for entrepreneurs to sleep more. I think the most important thing is to sort of get deep sleep, sound sleep, et cetera. I know people who sleep like 4 hours a night, but it's 100% deep or 100% sound, and they're totally refreshed and amazing. I wish I could do that.
Well, so you have this data from your sleep. How do you then inspire people to take action on that and change their behavior?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what we do so we have in aggregate about 200 millennia of human sleep data. I think it's the world's largest kind of sleep study ever conducted at scale. So it's an incredible amount of information. So we have it sort of across all different populations and geographies. We know, for example, we've had some really fun stuff with the data science where we can tell that women in our system across all ages and demographics and geographies sleep 20 minutes more than men, which is really interesting, right? And that's just the population in our system, But what we do is we sort of have it at that level, and then we can break it down by these different cohorts. But what's most interesting for the user is we can do things that are specifically tailored to you. So we have this part of our system called Today I Will, where based on your data and your sleep patterns, we'll tell you, today I'm gonna go to bed 30 minutes early, right? And we'll remind you through the day to do that and remind you sort of within a period before you sleep to go and do that. And we've seen incredible results with that. We've seen people going to bed who've opted into that, going to bed an average of 23 minutes earlier. They're more likely to keep their sleep goals, they're more likely to have deeper sleep. It's fascinating, right? So just those little reminders and nudges through the day help take that data, contextualize it, personalize it, and then help you take action.
What about the wearables market in general? I mean, you look at the recent news with the Nike's decision to kind of phase out the fuel band, and
is that official?
Well, the reports. But then Basis just sold to Intel. I mean, you guys acquired Body Media. What's the state of wearables? Are we in wearable overload?
I think it's really early. And obviously there's a lot of opportunity to do interesting things. I mean, our view long term is that ultimately things that are on your body are going to be what we think of as sort of this ultimate context engine for everything around you. So I'll give you an example. I mean, we think of it as, you're looking at that coin demo, I think that there's interesting opportunities for this to become your identity, right? For this thing to become your identity. We think because it's on you all the time. My phone's not on me, right? It's on the charger backstage. But it has sort of perfect knowledge. These devices have kind of perfect knowledge of you over time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we have the opportunity to tell your thermostat that you're in the room, you're hot or cold, you're hot because you're sick, you're hot because you went for a run, right? We can tell your car that you're not alert, you didn't sleep well last night. So ultimately, I think this is where it goes. And within that, sort of vision time frame, we're super early, right? It's sort of tracking the basics of activity and sleep. I think everyone sees a lot of promise. So there's lots of people kind of flooding into the space. But it's hard, right? I think everyone who's been in it for a while has had their set of challenges from a manufacturing perspective, getting these devices distributed, et cetera. So,
I mean, Jawbone's gone through its own challenges. I mean, you had a few sort of issues with the app, and describe to me, if you had to go back to that moment in time and give yourself some kind of advice, what would it be?
Oh, wow. there's when you're building and shipping products, there's always this sort of intense pressure to get it out in the world, to give birth to it. And I think that, one of the things we've realized is it's important to always take your pace and do things well, test them. I think, we've all learned a lot about wearables. It's like no other product category. You've got to test things differently. There's no way to replicate what happens to people in their lives 24 hours a day. It's not, you have full computers on your wrist, right? When you break your iPhone or you break your Mac, like, that you broke it because you can tell that the screen's cracked or something's not working. When that happens here, you can't actually tell. So, and there's so many things that happen to you throughout a day that we've learned along the way how to test that and how to try to replicate that as we design sort of future devices and sort of simulating that 24/7 thing. But I think the biggest piece of advice is take your pace, make sure you can do as much testing and thinking around robustness as you possibly can as you go through it.
So Fred Wilson was on stage earlier this morning, and he said that Apple in the future may find itself in trouble because it's so rooted in hardware, and its software is really behind. And Jawbone is in sort of this rare breed of companies that has both hardware and software. When did you guys decide that it was the right time to do both? And take me through the thought process there.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people don't know this, but we started out kind of developing algorithms for noise cancellation technology because the original vision of the company was in the mid-90s was to make Siri, and we realized that speech recognition was a problem, so we invented this noise cancellation technology to enable speech recognition to work better. Now, that was sort of software at what I would consider to be the lowest levels of the stack, right? Kind of firmware level algorithm stuff, and so the devices have always been kind of software powered, right? That was the big differentiation in the hardware when we decided to take those algorithms, that unique technology, and build a physical experience around it. That's how we got into the hardware business. It was a means of delivering our software to the market, but it was a different level of software. I would say really in kind of 2010, 11 is when we started to invest in building our own application software team, our own cloud-based infrastructure to support the service that was going to come with that runs with Up today. And that was a really interesting experience because now all of a sudden it was taking people who came from a totally different discipline, used to working at different paces of iteration cycles, and put that together with a hardware team where you've got to be really disciplined in hardware around resolving the experience.
That has to be hard to.
It was totally different cultures, and we clashed, and there was a lot of, and then we added a whole data science team, which brought a completely different discipline because we sort of think of ourselves as kind of being equal parts hardware, software, and data at a system level, which I think is important, particularly in the wearable space.
You mentioned the clash. How did you kind of resolve that?
Well, what we ended up doing was kind of setting aside and not structuring them as sort of independent teams, but realizing that we were ultimately trying to solve a bigger user problem, and that they should all unify as different parts of how you solve that user problem, right? And so we'd say, okay, here's the problem we're trying to solve for the user. Are we going to solve that best in hardware for this particular piece of it? Are we going to solve it in the application experience, in the service experience? What do we do in the cloud? How do we crunch that data? And then how does it all come together? So it came together around the user, and then each of these groups started to see themselves as different pieces of how you solve that problem, and different puzzle pieces fitting together. So that was really the kind of unifying factor, was sort of focusing on the customer experience, the user experience, and getting that right, and then using whatever tool was necessary, sort of system thing, but it took a lot of deconstruction. And then they all ended up learning things from each other, right? So the hardware guys, we typically work on different cycles that are longer. You have to resolve parts of the experience much more than you do in software, where you can put things out, test, iterate, et cetera. In hardware, you have to decide whether or not something gets in based on, is it good enough that someone would pay you for it, right?
Yeah.
And that was an interesting discipline to see the software guys learn, is that level of product resolution and experience, which I think in mobile apps is huge, because you only have sort of one chance to make a first impression, and people come in and out of mobile apps so fast, right? And so ultimately it ended up being this really interesting thing where everyone made each other better. The software guys made our hardware guys think about prototyping a lot faster and changing the way they iterate and how do they get things out so they can be tested, and sort of hardware hack, if you will, which was kind of a new thing. So it's been a wonderful thing, but it was painful for a while.
Was the Jambox born out of a hardware hack? Is that
A little bit, yeah. I mean, one of our engineering leaders came to me with this sort of little black box prototype, and I said, "What is that?" And he's like, "Just, it's a speaker." I said, "We don't want to be in this business. This is not so competitive."
You were like...
Initially, I was like, "Nah, this is like competitive." It's like Bose and Sony and all these people, and he's like, "Just listen to it." And I did, and instantly I saw it. We sort of saw that the quality of what we could produce in such a small footprint all of a sudden unlocked all the media in your phone, and we turned speaker into a computer, right? And when we got into that market in 2010, the percentage of wireless speakers sold in the industry of speakers in general was 0%. Last Christmas, I think it was 75%. Wow. Right, so in a short period of time, we were able to be fortunate enough to completely invent and transform that industry. But the whole proposition was turning the speaker into a computer, unlocking all of this mobile media functionality in your phone or your iPad. But it took me to listen to it first.
As a company, you do get compared to Apple a lot. And I'm curious, did you ever meet Steve Jobs and trade notes?
I did. I was fortunate to have met the sort of god of all things hardware related. The first time I did was in 2004. It was, I think, either May or April or May. It was right before the second D conference where we debuted our technology for the first time. We sort of went and paid our respects, and it was this sort of 45-minute thrashing of the initial product that we had, which many of you probably don't remember. It was a wired headset
so
that had a clip.
totally schooled you.
Well, it was interesting because he basically in 20 minutes first 20 minutes were like exposing every deep, dark fear that we had about the product. Just went straight to what was wrong. And he was right. He was 100% right, which was even harder, because we kind of knew better. And that actually, relates back to what I was telling you earlier about how you put sort of hardware, software, and data together, because I think the thing that I took away from that experience, which I shared with the company when he passed away, was that was the time where it really solidified in my mind that it's all about the user. And everything that you do is in service of that. Every decision that you make, every design decision, every technology decision, everything's about how do you solve that problem for the user. And whatever disciplines you put together, if you kind of do that all the time and be ruthless about that, and it's okay to be ruthless about that, it'll all kind of come together. Because you're serving a sort of higher master, if you will.
Did you guys have as much of a sort of focus on design before that meeting with Steve?
Yeah. No, I started working with Eve Bahar in kind of late 2002, early 2003. So at the time, I think the only products that had sort of a design, hardware products and technology that had sort of a design focus before that were the Palm 5. Which was very successful compared to the Palm 3. It was essentially the same product, purely based on a better design experience where there was more of an emotional connection to the user. And then these were the early days of the iPod. So, and I think Apple really, for the entire industry, was kind of at that tip of the arrow, showing that you had to do both form and function, and that users are no longer willing to sacrifice form for functionality. I think you need to have both. And they were the tip of the arrow for us. And we were able to kind of follow behind.
Do you think design has become a little bit of a buzzword now? I mean, everyone, I feel like every consumer internet company or enterprise now is like, we're design focused. Even VC firms are building these huge design operations.
Yes. I mean, we started doing this in 2002. It was not cool. It was very hard. People thought we were idiots, the investors. So why are you spending all this money? It's so much more expensive. It's so much harder. Right? I mean, being design focused takes time, because what I think of design is its attention to detail, and again, in service of that better user experience. So, but ultimately, I think even though it is a buzzword, it's fantastic for the user, because people are being a lot more thoughtful about what they do in bits or what they do in atoms and how that comes together. So it's ultimately a great thing that people are focused on it.
There's a lot of
doing it well, though.
Yeah. There's a lot of talk that you're raising a new round of capital. Do you have any comment on that?
We're fortunate to have some of the best investors on the planet, and we're fortunate enough that people are excited by what we're doing in the capital markets, and we get to, have the opportunity to go chase our dreams every day.
So if this hypothetical money that you're raising, what would you do with it?
I feel like we're just at the beginning of so many things that we're doing. The whole time that we've been working on Jawbone, I feel like has been sort of a warm-up and a training ground for the opportunities that are ahead of us. And it's interesting, in my business, we kind of live 3 to 5 years out. And so everything that we wear today, to me, feels like, we're so far behind. I want to get to all these things that we have in the lab and that are being engineered and produced now. So it's always like very, very forward-looking. So I think that for us, whatever capitalization we have is all about going deeper in the things that we're doing and going wider as well.
Let's talk about acquisitions. So, I mean, you look at basis as Intel. I mean, you always hear these reports that Apple and Google are sort of sniffing around. I mean, I understand you probably can't get into specifics, but has there been acquisition interest in you?
Sure. Of course. I think that any company that is doing interesting things, there's always people who are, bigger companies that are interested in looking at that innovation and looking at the talent and seeing what they can do with it. Right?
Why stay independent?
Look, our goal has always been to build this great company, right? And to deliver value to people. And if we can continue to do that and be afforded the opportunity to do that, it's, you get to live your dreams. So, and I think that's the entrepreneurial dream for all of us, which is we have an opportunity to change the world, and we're doing that, so.
Yeah. I mean, you've been doing this for over 10, 12 years,
Yeah.
right? And, Ben Horowitz, someone who's closely involved with your company, has this amazing sort of post that's now become this Bible for founders and entrepreneurs called The Struggle.
Right.
And I'd love to hear, you've gone through, you've gone through highs and lows, and how do you deal with it?
The only thing I could say there is you got to embrace it, because ultimately you have to find reward in the journey. Because what I've learned is that the goalpost changes. I used to think, oh my God, getting to like 100 million was going to be like this huge accomplishment. We arrived, we got there. I was like, how do we get to $1 billion? Then we get there, and it's like, how do we get to 100 billion? And if you're that kind of an entrepreneur, you're always sort of moving the goalpost on yourself, moving your goalpost on the organization. And so what you learn is that you've got to enjoy the journey, both the highs and the lows. You learn a lot more, and you get better through the lows, right? I've found that in failures has always been a much better teacher in some ways than successes. And so that's the wonderful way that we approach those things. But yeah, it is, of course it's a struggle. And I think that the interesting thing for me in my own personal journey has been the things that felt so existential that when we were 5 people with no money are not that different in terms of how existential they feel when you're, hundreds of people with hundreds of millions of dollars and big scale. It's just, they feel exactly the same in terms of the pressure and how you're going to solve these things. The scale of problems is different, but ultimately the way you feel is the same. And so learning to navigate those challenges early on and how you sort of process them as a person is not that different than when you're in a different place.
I mean, Horowitz says that being an entrepreneur can be one of the loneliest things that you do. Do you agree with that?
Totally. Yeah, totally. Absolutely right. And so I've been fortunate enough to surround myself with people like Ben who've been through that struggle, and other great founders and investors that have been through their own struggles, who can provide perspective when you're going through those things. So it helps you kind of separate yourself from the situation and sort of see it with a wide angle lens and a longer horizon to see how to get through it. So that's one of the ways that I've kind of utilized the people around me to help me through some of those times.
But you have a pretty impressive list of investors. I mean, you've got Sequoia, you've got Khosla, you've got Andreessen Horowitz,
Yeah.
Kleiner,
Yuri, JP Morgan, Goldman, Silver Lake.
I mean,
Am I missing anybody?
it's like
I'm
the
sure I am.
entire top of the Midas list right there.
Yeah, Rizvi Traverse, yeah, a lot of them.
Oh, so Rizvi Traverse, isn't that the...
They are an investor in our company, yes.
Okay. Trying to catch you. Could you give me an example of where you've really leaned on an investor or a mentor maybe?
Oh wow!
Well,
what's been amazing for me is having all these great investors from Andreessen to Sequoia and Khosla and JP Morgan and Goldman. they all have different kind of what I think of as superpowers, right? Vinod is this sort of massive thinker. And it was the first when I first met him several years ago in like 2004 or 5. You know, I remember thinking, wow, it was the first person that made me feel like my ideas were really small. And so I always go to him when I want to sort of look past what I'm doing and how could we make it bigger, put the same energy into things, but yet have a much bigger amplification of what we're doing. Ben is the management guru, right? It's rare that I get into situations where I can't call Ben and he has some sort of experience that relates to it, where he can say, these are the things that might happen and these are the things you think about. And it always astounds me that, like, wow, how did you sort of anticipate those things happening? And Roelof brings a completely different sort of way of thinking about, you know, organizational discipline and how we get efficient and how we enable ourselves to do these great things, right? And so they all just bring different things, and those are just some of the guys, right?
Yeah.
And some of the late stage guys bring a view of you know, market dynamics and big macro and all that stuff. And so I've been able to been fortunate to sort of be able to sort of cherry pick what the best of each of these superpowers are and try to synthesize them to the benefit of the company.
I mean, one of the things that's so interesting about Silicon Valley is, you know, you guys are, you know, CEOs of all these companies, you know, successful companies, even early stage. You guys talk to each other a lot, right? I mean,
yeah.
there is this sort of inner conversation happening that maybe us journalists wish that we could be a part of, but
the support network.
Yeah, but that's a great way to put it. It's a support network, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and how often do you know, call up so-and-so and be like, you know, what do you think about this?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. San Francisco's really become that kind of center, and there's definitely stuff here in New York, and I'm friends with some of the guys that are based out here. I think it's kind of ebbs and flows. I think it's as we get together, or people need things, or, you know, just happen to run into folks. I think it's all of that, you know, and it's wherever but if I need something, I call somebody, and I think it's vice versa. So.
Besides your investors, have you had any other mentors that have really kind of helped you along this path?
Loads.
Anyone you want to?
No, I mean, I think I find mentorship even from my team, right? I mean, I try to put together a team where all of the people are better at me than what they do. And that's sort of the way we think about hiring, is always get people that are better than you at what they do. And so you learn a lot from them. And so I feel mentored by those people. I feel mentored by users. I feel mentored by all of the people in our ecosystem. Marissa, who's, you know, a very old friend of mine from Stanford, is on our board now. She's been a wonderful board member and mentor in many different ways. So yeah, I'm fortunate. I have a lot of people that I can draw from.
That's great. So what's the next piece of data that I'm going to be able to get from this?
Well, you know, as I said earlier, like, I think of this kind of wearables market in phases, and today is like either phase 0 or phase 1, right? Where we're just getting people used to the notion of wearing something on their wrist. It's so important that you keep it on, so it has to be designed from a power perspective and the right materials and all of that to stay on your body and to be with you so you don't take it off. And just getting people used to the notion that you put something like a computer on your wrist and you can track your activity and sleep. Is sort of the basic stuff that we're doing today. I think tomorrow is all about more information, more signals, more understanding of yourself, but then taking all of that and really crunching it. I often ask people, it's like, who knows, is 100 heart rate good or bad? Everyone's like talking about, oh, let's get heart rate in these devices.
Yeah.
Is it good or people have no idea. Right? I could ask you, is 100? The answer is it depends on what you're doing and who you are and so many different circumstances, right? And so I think taking all that data, contextualizing it for the individual user, and then turning it into understanding, which then leads to action, I think that's really the holy grail in this space, right? And I think we've started to do some of that stuff. We're very early in it, but I think we're definitely leading a lot of that push, is taking all this like massive data, personalizing it, and then making it work for you. So turning that into understanding, which leads to action. I think that's the future, but I think it's taking more signals, correlating them, getting that data set richer so that the knowledge base and understanding gets even more powerful. That's, I think, where it's going.
Thanks, Hosain.
Thank you.